In South Carolina in the early 1950s, the children who went to the Scotts Branch School had no way of knowing that their school and their story would one day have a place in the history books of their country.
50 years ago, Prince Edward County, Virginia, and Clarendon County, South Carolina were two of 5 communities that brought their demands for equal education and equal treatment under the law to the U.S. Supreme Court. Between 1952 and 1955, the court addressed those grievances in the landmark case known as Brown versus the Board of Education. Yet in the ruling, the justices used a 4-word phrase that many believe delayed for years the process of change. During the late 40s in Clarendon County, South Carolina, ordinary people were taking a stand against inequality. The black parents' request for a school bus had grown into more than a matter of transportation. The first assault on legalized segregation was about to begin. People in the community looked to Reverend J.A. Delaine, a local pastor, school teacher, and NAACP member, for leadership.
Not really. I just remember this tall, mixed gray-haired man. You know, he was like a leader.
People tended to gravitate to him for assistance.
These people did the leadership from their churches, and therefore the stories were told from the pulpit.
The patriots of America made their greatest contribution by their struggle for public education. This glorious vision has not yet become a reality. We need God's grace to keep the vision, lest the people perish.
He told them basically what they had to do, and that was to follow through. Probably was Reverend Delaine who suggested that they sign a petition.
Reverend Delaine got up and said, "This is going to mean my job, but I'm willing to sacrifice that. And it's going to mean more than my job. It's going further than that. But if y'all are willing that we will continue to go as long as there's some standing until we get the result that we are looking for, I will accept." So they agreed.
Harry Briggs, a father of 5 who worked at a local gas station, was one of many parents and children to sign a petition claiming the school board did not provide equal facilities for black students.
Well, I was around maybe 7, 8 years old. All I knew then was a piece of paper where all these people came to our houses, the cars, they came by, the car, you know, a wagon, horseback, mule bag, to sign this petitioner.
The Briggs name was listed first in the Clarendon County case that reached the Supreme Court as Briggs versus Elliott. Differences between black and white schools, Reverend Delaine and the Clarendon County petitioners had upped the ante. They were now claiming that the practice of segregation violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution.
The courage of these people, who not only stood to lose their jobs, but also to lose their lives. They were running the risk of being shot or being hung. This was a life and death struggle between a philosophy of life, where the South was fighting for what it conceived to be a way of life that they had enjoyed after they were successful in the Reconstruction period, and they wanted it to continue.
Cases were joined with lawsuits from Delaware, the District of Columbia, and Topeka, Kansas.
Well, they all came to the Supreme Court at separate times. That the court recognized that all of them had the same issue involved. So to save the time of the court, what they wanted was to get them all here at one time, and let's decide this issue once and for all. Stroke of genius, really.
The issue was one most important issues that had faced the court in its history. Integrity of the court would be at stake as to whatever it did.
That court was seriously divided along philosophical lines and rarely issued unanimous decisions. It was headed by Chief Justice Fred Vinson, who had repeatedly failed to forge unity on important issues. After hearing arguments on what was an explosive issue, the court delayed its decision, scheduling a rehearing of the entire case for late fall 1953. But before that, Chief Justice Vinson died of a heart attack.
I was all of 25 years old, and I was one of his clerks until September. He died approximately 2 months after I arrived, and that is what provided the vacancy for the ultimate appointment of Earl Warren.
President Eisenhower appoints Governor Earl Warren of California as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The 62-year-old Californian shown here with his family.
Well, you've probably read that Frankfurter said to his clerks at the time that the death of Vincent shows that there is a God. Not that he was glad that Fred Vinson had lost his life, but that at this particular moment in time, the change in the Chief Justiceship was so important.
If Earl Warren hadn't become the Chief Justice when he did, the whole history of the country might have been different.
He was a tough fellow, although he gave a very genial appearance. He also was not a great intellect, but he had very strong principles, and he also had a very keen political sense, having been governor of California several times.
People liked him almost immediately. I think they saw Warren being the kind of Chief Justice that could weld the court together in a way that perhaps Vinson had not been able to.
We were very aware of the seriousness of the case. We literally did not know whether there would be blood in the streets as a result of the decision, regardless of which way it came down. It was very serious business.
With its ruling, which reversed 60 years of legalized inequality in the country, the Supreme Court now faced the task of implementing the Brown decision. The judges took a year to devise a plan. On May 31st, 1955, they returned the cases to the district courts where they originated, requiring that desegregation begin within a reasonable time. The opinion contained a 4-word phrase, "with all deliberate speed." The negative reaction in Clarendon County was not only swift, but chilling. Driven from his ministry to a nearby community, Reverend Delaine received a letter.
We have been notified by the best of authority that you are the one that started the school segregation mess at Manning, South Carolina, and that you was run out of Manning for your filthy, dirty work there. Maybe, M-A-B-Y, you don't know Lake City, but you're going to find out real soon. Several hundred of us have had a meeting and pledged ourselves to put you where you belong, if there is such a place. I wonder if you ever heard about the Negro postmaster that was sent to Lake City and was notified to leave, L-E-V-E. He refused. However, he left in a coffin. So we have decided to give you 10 days to leave Lake City. And if you are not away by then rather let you spread your filthy poison any longer. We have made plans to move you if it takes dynamite, D-Y-N-I-M-I-T-E, to do it. This is final. On the 7th day after this letter had been received, the church burned. 3 days later was the shootout.
And about 8 o'clock, a caravan of cars came by our house just shooting, And you could see the fire and the dust, where the balls would strike the ground. You could see the dust and the fire coming from the guns. So he got up And he said, you go next door. He said, I'm going to stay until they shoot me out. He said, well, I don't know which one of us is going to win. He said, but I'm not going to run. I haven't done anything to anybody. I've only asked for my rights, so I'm not going. And, of course, we finally heard a rifle shot, and it was my husband.
Oh, my God. Fire! Man, you and the children get out of the house! The place is on fire! Everybody get out. Come on. Come on. Come on. Hurry. Get out. Come on. Come on. Come on. Go right to the pump. Get a pump. Hurry, Joseph. Go on. Go on. Come on, son. That's right. Go ahead. Go ahead. That's right. Run, boy, run. Hose down the roof. Come on, we'll help them with the hoses.
Real sorry, Reverend, but the district line is here. We don't have authority to cross over. You'll have to get the Scotch branch unit to come help.
I don't care about the Scotch branch line. My house is burning down. You've got to stop it.
Let's go, boy.
Reverend Delaine paid a heavy price to lead the fight for desegregated schools. He was forced to flee Clarendon County, losing his home, his church, and his community. He would never return to South Carolina again.
Whether the barriers may be in custom, society, legal barriers, or barriers of race and creed, all can be broken down if the price is paid. The enemy may even use the dogs, prodding rods, dynamite, burn your house, dynamite, or burn your church. They may war upon your nerve. They may abuse the legal profession and have you condemned for slander or something else. They may even run you out of your house at midnight. But die with the staff in your hand. Going forward.
In the year 2003, almost 50 years from the Brown versus Board decision, the 108th Congress of the United States awarded a Congressional Gold Medal posthumously on behalf of Reverend Joseph A. Delaine in recognition of his contribution to the nation as a pioneer in the effort to desegregate public schools that led directly to the landmark desegregation case of Brown et al. Versus Board of Education of Topeka et al. Today, we are honored and privileged to have in our midst the daughter of Reverend Joseph A. Delaine, Ophelia Delaine Gona. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome her.
Glad to be here.
You've just seen a 12-minute movie on sort of your father and your life, as some of it portrayed via the world of Hollywood, some of it in a sort of documentary which came out last year entitled With All Deliberate Speed, which is sort of the subject matter we're focusing in on the next couple of days. What was your sense as you were watching this?
Most of it was fine, and I appreciated it, but I am always amused and kind of irritated how some of the things are twisted in order to meet Hollywood standards. The scene for the house burning, for example, we were not even living in the house when it burned down, and that happened well before the other part did, so that it was out of sequence and it was not true, but it got the message across.
Tell me a little bit, well, let me do this. Have you did you read Richard Kluger's book? And Richard Kluger's book, which is sort of the seminal treatise on the whole subject matter, which is been quoted over and over again, starts with the story of your father. That is literally page 1. And it says, if you don't mind, before it was over, they fired him from the little schoolhouse at which he had taught devotedly for 10 years. They fired his wife and 2 of his sisters and a niece. And they threatened him with bodily harm, and they sued him on trumped-up charges and convicted him in a kangaroo court and left him with a judgment that denied him credit from any bank. They burned his house to the ground while the fire department stood around watching the flames consume the night. And they stoned the church at which he pastored and fired shotguns at him out of the dark. But he was not Job, and so he fired back and called the police, who did not come and kept not coming. Then he fled, driving north at 85 miles an hour over country roads until he was across the state line. Soon after, they burned his church to the ground and charged him for having shot back in the night with felonious assault with a deadly weapon. And so he became an official fugitive from justice. And in time, the governor of the state announced they would not pursue this minister who had caused all this trouble and said of him, good riddance. All of this happened because he was black and brave, and because others followed when he decided the time had come to leave. Those are pretty powerful.
That's poetry, words. Isn't it?
Yeah. Is that your dad?
Yeah. I am always amazed how he put up with all of the things that happened, and to my knowledge, never showed any fear at all. In fact, much of this happened and I was not aware of it at all. For example, at one time he was threatened on the street and a man threatened to kill him. I knew nothing at all about that. I did know about the things that happened in Lake City when the church was burned and the house was pelleted, and my mother and I were harassed. But the things that happened in Somerton, I never knew about the threats and the danger that was involved. And now that I'm trying to write a book about it, I look back on what he did and what he put up with, and I'm just amazed that he went right on doing whatever he was going to do. And he said that God told him, no, he promised God that he was not going to quit until God told him to quit. And God didn't do that until October 10th, 1955.
Tell me a little bit about his background. Where was he born? A little biography.
He's originally from South Carolina, from Clarendon County. I was just telling my friend earlier that on the paternal side, his family never were slaves. We understand that they came from North Africa, and only his father, I think it was, well, somewhere back there, married some women who were also free people on my mother's side, and it was a different story, however. But they were always free people, and many of the people in that area were actually freed for a long time, even before slavery was over. And they had a sense of independence about them. His family believed that you take things into your own hands and you are responsible for your fate. He developed that to a point that was more extreme or marked than any of his brothers or sisters did. In fact, he was the one that was the outstanding member of the family. Out of a family of 13, and 7 of them were boys, he was the only one to go to college, to finish college. He actually sent himself to school from the time he was in 7th grade. He ran away from home when he was 14 because the principal wanted to punish him for something that a white boy said he had done and my father said he had not done. So he ran away from home. He stayed in Atlanta for a couple of years. Then he returned to the Somerton area, Somerton Manning area, and saved money, then sent himself to school. He finally got his bachelor's degree at age 31.
Oh, terrific. When did he get his divinity degree?
I don't know that. I haven't gotten to that point in the papers yet.
His father was a minister?
His father was a minister, yes.
And this was in the AME congregation?
Yes, in the AME congregation. His forebears were not tradesmen, artisans. And he himself learned carpentry. And I get quite amused as I'm writing that he was 33 when he set out on his life's work, and he was a carpenter, just as Jesus was. And of course, Daddy was very, very religious, and I am always amused about that parallel.
What do you think it was in your dad's background that sort of changed him from a preacher to, this is my phrase, a rebel with a cause?
He was always a rebel. His family were rebels. And it's amazing, as I read through the history, the things that they rebelled against. But according to his writings, his cause came when a veteran of the First World War who was living in Belgium returned to South Carolina because the war had started. And this man began to recruit people to the voter registration drive for blacks and for equalization of teachers' pay. And when my father heard him speak, he was aroused to become more active. He was active at that time, but to become more civically active. So that was in about 42. His involvement in what resulted in Brown happened in 47 when he heard the president of the state conference of the NAACP speak and challenge.
This was Reverend Hinton?
Yes.
What was he like? I've read that name before. Did your dad write about him as to what was it that made Reverend Hinton, kind of get your dad to an extra level of energy?
I haven't come across anything that Daddy wrote about Hinton himself, but Hinton was a no-nonsense man that, from what I understand, that did not hesitate to use vulgar language to tell you to get out there and do it. He might have been a minister also, I'm not sure about that, but he was a very forceful personality that told people to get out and do it, and he egged them on. And I guess that kind of inspiration, if you had a tendency to be a little different, you were willing to take the challenge, and Dad took the challenge.
Was your dad a member of the NAACP at that time?
I guess so. That's difficult for me to answer without looking it up, because in about 42, Daddy began to get a charter for an NAACP branch in Clarendon County. Then he took ill and was away for a year, and by the time he came back, it had died down. So they were trying to start up a new NAACP branch in Clarendon County. I'm sure he belonged to the NAACP. He had a number of friends who were quite active in the Columbia branch. But it was getting very dangerous to belong to the NAACP, and so you didn't tell people that you belong to it. And they had secret names that they used to hide behind and belonging to the NAACP.
At that base, was he scared? Did he ever talk about his own personal safety?
I have never heard of him being scared, but twice in his life.
Sorry.
And one time was the night when he finally decided it was time to leave South Carolina. In his writings, he said that 1949 was the most difficult year of his life. And that could have been because he realized that his life was being threatened, and he lost his job in that year. And the people he was leading were losing their jobs and were being retaliated against. And I think that I know that he felt like he was a shepherd, that he was leading people, and he felt very strongly and regretted deeply that his lambs were being punished. So he felt a strong responsibility for that, what was happening to the people.
Given, I read someplace where he, certainly part of his life experience is not having the availability of bus, walking great distances to school. Was that the issue for him in the 40s in Clarendon County where it was busing?
Was that why he was involved?
Yeah, was that, I mean, I realize a lot of things were going on, but that was seemingly the most pronounced issue.
Oh, I think that was, I don't even know what I think yet about that, but it was probably an issue that they could focus on out of many issues and recruit people. But in the talk tonight, I will point out what he said specifically about the state of the schools. He had to walk, before he ran away from home, he had to walk about 5 miles each way to get to school. My mother had to walk about 5 miles each way to get to school. And the first things that happened in Clarendon County with the recruiting of the people and getting them to move, my mother and father, my mother funded this. So the two of them paid for all the transportation and the initial lawyers' bills and so on. And they were undoubtedly the impetus behind it all. Without my mother's cooperation, my father couldn't have done what he did, and without the two of them, we never would have gotten to Brown. So.
Is she the unsung hero of this story?
Yes. Behind every good man, there's a better woman. So.
Well said. Often said by my wife. The time came where your father had listened to Reverend Hinton, and Reverend Hinton sort of laid down the gauntlet about the fact, if we're going to take the next step, that in fact it's one which requires a petition to be signed by an individual petitioning for equal treatment, or at least certainly a bus for the good of the students, and entered the Pearsons. Did your dad talk about how difficult it was to convince, is it Levi Pearson, I think, to sign that first petition, to really take that first step?
It was not difficult to convince him to do that. The Pearsons were friends of my father's. They were, both of them, Levi and Hammett, were practically illiterate. And when they had known my father briefly in childhood, and I don't know all of the details, but when he came back to the area, he was the principal of a little school right on the edge of the Pearsons' farm. And the Pearsons' mother had made her two sons pledge to each other to support each other all of their lives. So they were good friends of Daddy's. They took advantage of Daddy for him to help count the money and keep their business straight and so on. They were landowners. And I believe that they were landowners because of my father's leadership and influence with them and getting to, at that time there was a farmer's loan program that at first black people couldn't get, and then Roosevelt did something and made it possible. So for about 2 years, loans were relatively easy for some black people to get, and as a matter, at that time, the Pearsons got this loan. So they remained very good friends. They saw each other almost once a week. As my father was a very outgoing person, we always laugh, and I hope I remember how I got off onto this, but we always laugh that when he went to visit people, whatever you were doing, he would do it. If you were picking cotton, he'd pick a few bowls of cotton. If you were plowing, he said, let me do that a bit. If you were sitting on the front porch with your legs up, he sat there with the legs up. And if you were eating, he sat at your table and ate. So that everybody knew Daddy. That was true until he died. Everybody around knew him. And when this event occurred that Hinton threw out this challenge, I don't know what day of the week that was, but when Daddy went back down to the area, within a week, he got my brother, my elder brother, whose picture was in there, and put him in the car, and they went to the Pearsons, and they discussed the matter. Well, the two Pearson brothers, Hammett was the man who said what he felt, and he was quick to react. And Levi was a very slow responding man. He was thoughtful, and he wasn't going to let his tongue get him into a problem. So that the three men, Daddy and the two Pearsons, talked about it, and they immediately, from what I understand, decided that Levi would be a plaintiff. When this happened, everybody in the neighborhood, all of the black people, were very happy about this. They were all behind him. They were ready to do whatever they could to assist. So people were glad that something was going to happen. They were also glad it wasn't them. But they were very glad that something was going to happen, and they were looking forward eagerly to this coming to court. Well, it didn't, so.
Was that disappointment when ultimately, on a real technicality of district lines, that it was thrown out of court? Was your dad disappointed, disillusioned, any sense?
I'm trying to remember his exact words, which were, I don't remember the exact words, but something to the effect that he was crushed. All of his efforts for the last year had gone to naught, and he was very upset about that. But he wasn't one to cry in his milk or whatever, so that they got back on the ball and began to work again as to what would happen next. And within a year, they had managed to get a conference with Thurgood Marshall and to convince Thurgood Marshall that they were the people that the NAACP should support. This was a very difficult thing to do because the NAACP had just finished arguing for voter registration, making sure that the blacks would get to be involved in voting in South Carolina, and they had just finished the teacher equalization cases, both of which had gone on for several years. And so the funds of the NAACP were pretty much depleted. And they felt the NAACP had to raise money because you can't argue cases without money, as you well know. And they were looking for, well, if they could get something in Atlanta, for example, with all those people there, so many black people in Atlanta, if they could get something in New Orleans, wherever, a lot of people, well, that would be good. But here come these people from Clarendon County, South Carolina. Where is that? And Clarendon County, South Carolina, that's just about as far in the backwoods as you can get. You really can't go any farther because you get to the river and you can't get across. And not only was it far in the backwoods, but they were just about as poor as you could get. So here you are in a place where people are poor and ignorant and backwoods. When I say ignorant, illiterate, unlearned. Why is NAACP going to take this kind of case from these people who can't even read? They can't get any money from there, so Thurgood Marshall was going to turn it down. And Daddy and the Pearsons and 3 other people, I guess they were some strong convincers, because they convinced Thurgood Marshall, who went back to New York and convinced the rest of the Legal Defense Fund that they should take this case from South Carolina, which at that time was for equalization of educational opportunities for equal facilities. And so they filed this case, they put it all together, and by the way, do you want me to know this?
Please, this is phenomenal.
At this point,
She's a teacher, you can tell. This is good. I'm being instructed.
Judge J. Wade Swearing had been the judge for the teacher equalization case, and he'd been the judge for the voter registration case, and so Thurgood Marshall had appeared before him several times already. He knew Thurgood Marshall, and the NAACP had made a decision back in the 30s that they were not going to challenge segregation head-on. So they were taking case by case and chipping away at this thing, and with the Clarendon County case, they prepared the case, they went before, filed it with Judge Waring, and at the pre-trial hearing, apparently Waring looked at this and said to Thurgood Marshall, "Why are you trying to sue for separate but equal? The law already says that you have separate but equal." And then, you know, you really can't throw in this bit here about violation of the 14th Amendment, because you know as well as I do that that takes a 3-judge court if you're going to tackle something that is in the South Carolina Constitution. And he said, "I'll dismiss this without prejudice." So they took the case back, and then AACP asked, Marshall asked the Clarendon County people, "Do you want to go on with this?" And of course these people said yes. They had also apparently made pledges, vows to each other that they would fight to the death. And so they went back, and it took quite a long time to finally get the petitioners. That was for a number of reasons, but the case was then changed into a desegregation case rather than a equalization case. And once Waring said, "No, I will not take this," that was all that Thurgood Marshall needed. He was a smart man. He said, "Wait a minute. I'm sure that this is what happened now. I'm making this up, but I'm sure it's what happened. Wait a minute. We have this opening now in order to argue for desegregation. Let's go around this country and see what other cases we can get." And they went around, and of course things had been off and on going for a number of years in Kansas, this challenge, that challenge, but they had something kind of brewing there, so the NAACP worked up that group, and then the kids were going on in Virginia, etc. So the NAACP ended up with its 3 cases that it's ready to carry to the Supreme Court. And meanwhile, the case from Delaware got sent off. And at the same time, the case arguing for the 5th Amendment infringement came from D.C. So.
As you think about that case before Justice Waring, South Carolina capitulated and be separate but equal. You know, Marshall was arguing 2 strategies.
Mm-hmm.
One is schools clearly are not equal. Clearly we want busing. We want the same. And as I understood it, South Carolina sort of came in and said, "All right, you win." Did they not say that? No. They didn't want to get to the...
What happened, as soon as the separate but equal was filed in November 49, by January the next year, they were starting to put up some junky old addition to the school in Somerton. But no, they didn't say anything that I know of. It was when the case went to the 3-judge court. When it got there, even before it was argued, they agreed, yes, it's not equal, so it's equal, but we'll make it a little more equal. And so they voted in the $75 million bond and started equalizing things, in quotes, equalizing.
So it's really a gutsy move at this point by your dad and his fellow parishioners and townspeople to really take the next step, which was a roll of the dice. And I even think, my sense is that the NAACP wasn't, within its ranks, quite sure whether they should go for the whole enchilada at that point, because if they lose, you didn't know it would set things back.
Well, see, that was what they had decided way back in the 30s, that the reason they wouldn't do this, because if they lose on something like this, they didn't want to take that kind of chance. But when Waring pretty much laid down the rules for Marshall, what he should do, and it seems to me that whatever he said in that pretrial hearing was enough for Marshall to know this is the way we got to do it. And he went out and took the bull by the horns. And I think, I don't know what, and I don't even have a conjecture as to what happened with the Legal Defense Fund at that point, what kind of agreement they had. But they apparently had enough that they could say, yeah, let's go and get together Kansas and Virginia, which hadn't even started, by the way, when Briggs came along.
Were you part of the doll experiment at Kenneth Clark?
I was in college, in high school by that time. Those were small children.
Were you aware of it?
Nope. In fact, by the time that happened, we were living in a different town. Yes, because the case was 1951, and we moved away in 50. So, no, I didn't even know that that had happened until years afterwards.
Did your dad talk about it at all?
Nope. My brother, my elder brother knew quite a bit about what was, he's the one that was interviewed there, quite a bit about what was going on until he went away to school in 49. And then my younger brother knew quite a bit about what happened after 1950. But I guess as a girl, I was kind of sheltered, and also I was busy reading most of the time when people were talking. So.
Therefore, is this a quest for you to kind of fill in a gap, not only for yourself, but also a gap for history?
Yes, it's a quest for me for history. It's not really something that I feel like I have to do for me, but it's something that I have to do for history, because I think that we forget, or we never appreciate what has gone before, and too many misconceptions are there, and then people forget about it, and they never realize that we could actually go back there again. As terrifying, as preposterous as it seems, it's possible.
Your dad attended, I think, 2 of the Supreme Court arguments, and at least one of them. Did he ever come back from Washington and talk to you about that?
No, see, I was in college by that time. So when that happened, I was not at home to know about it. And I guess he pretty much was spent out talking about it by the time I came home. In the year between Brown 1 and Brown 2, I was home in the summertime, and that is the first time that the people really began to threaten and bother our family after Brown won. And that was because the White Citizens Councils had started. The man who had been the lawyer for the school board in Somerton, where Scotts Branch School was, where this began, S.E. Rogers, he also helped to argue at the Elliott side of Briggs v. Elliott. He became the executive secretary or some such thing for the White Citizens Councils. And he came to the new town where we were living, Lake City, and announced to the people there that you know who you're harboring here in this town? You're harboring the very Negro who started all of this. And after his visit to that town, then things got bad for us, and they began harassing us, and it escalated after that.
The letter your brother read on that film clip, that would have been that time period.
That's correct. That's after 54. Prior to that time, there were threats to Daddy in Somerton, but they were never any direct threats to Daddy. And people were always a little afraid to do too much, I think, in those days. But by the time they weren't afraid to start the retaliations against people, like not buying their crops, their cotton and things like that. But they weren't, most of them weren't out to be vicious at that point, I don't think. But it was the White Citizens Councils really stirred up things.
You weren't there when the shooting incident occurred? You weren't at the homeland when you were at that time?
No, I was going back to school then. Just before that, in the month or two before that, boys would ride by the house and bombard the house with bottles and things. And when I'd walk on the street, they'd start out a car and I'd have to jump out of the way, and they would do that to my mother also.
Were you scared?
No. You know, when you can't be afraid of what you don't know about, I guess. If you haven't thought about it even, and I still can't understand hatred in people. I just can't envision somebody doing something mean to another person because he has on the wrong color shoes, because his face is the wrong color. I can't fathom it, and therefore I don't have any fear of it.
Ultimately, your dad, I don't want to say retaliation is the wrong word, but he, in order to mark the car that actually took the shots, he was accused. He was accused of...
The chief of police told Daddy, well, you know, you could shoot back at them, and Daddy said, but then you'd arrest me. And so the chief of police told him, well, you can mark the car. Daddy came from a family that were not fools, and one of the things that we learned very early was how to handle a gun. I won't touch one now, but we learned how to do that. And in our house, over all the doors and windows, if you had to put up your hands and surrender or something, you just stood on tiptoes and you got down the gun and you were armed. So that, I guess, when Daddy was threatened a little bit too much, he decided, well, maybe I will mark the car. Which, according to rumor, more happened than just marking the car. But all I can say, they must have been going pretty slowly for something bad to have happened.
Right. That then led to accusations, and at some point, obviously, your dad decided it's time to leave.
I didn't discover, and I don't know if I've discovered completely, but I didn't discover until about 3 months ago what actually happened. The bishop kept asking Daddy to let him transfer him. Daddy kept refusing. He said, when God tells me to leave, I will leave. Now, apparently what happened that night was that God appeared to Daddy in the form of the black policeman who came and said, Rev, they've sent me down to get you, to bring you down to the police station, but what they're really going to do is to kill you tonight. You better get out of town. And apparently that was the voice of God. So.
You left with your mother?
No, that little clip was kind of accurate there, that he told his mother when the shooting started, and he had not shot back at that point, he told Mother to go to the people next door. She went there. And so he stayed at home, and finally they heard the car leave. And so the next morning he had gone to the next town and went to somebody who was in the NAACP there, and that man came back and got Mother the next day. My computer from the car, please. I was laughing because I wrote something that I don't think you wanted on tape, but it's, if I must say it about my own writing, it really is a moving piece that you might enjoy hearing.
I wouldn't throw it to continue the journey, does he wind his way now up to Buffalo?
He left Somerton. He left Lake City. He went to Florence. In Florence, the NAACP man went down the next morning to get my mother. They drove to Charlotte, where I was in school, and then they took him to the airport. And he flew to Washington. Oh, by the way, coming from Lake City, from Florence to Charlotte, he was packed under blankets in the back of a car, and Mother and this other man sat in the front as if they were some poor blacks that were traveling with their goods. And he went to Washington, where he got off the plane and he got into a taxi that 3 or 4 other people were in, a van or something. And as he's sitting in the front with the driver, these other passengers were white men, and one of them said to the others, "Did you read about that Negro down in South Carolina that shot those white folks?" And Daddy said he was in the front shaking. So ultimately they got out, and the driver took him on to wherever he was going, which was his cousin's place. And his cousin said to him, "Man, what did you come here for? This place is as bad as South Carolina." So he then smuggled him over to New Jersey, to somebody's house in Trenton area, and they smuggled him to Newark, and from Newark he somehow got over to New York. And at that, when he got in New Jersey, I think he sent a letter to the, what was that man's name? What was the little?
Hinton?
No. The man who's in charge of the FBI. Hoover. He sent a letter to Hoover informing him of his whereabouts. And when he got in New York, he did the same thing again. So he had started he carried on a voluminous correspondence with people in the government. He didn't know how to get things done, so he wrote to anybody that seemed like the appropriate person. He never got any results from it, but he created a paper trail.
Remarkable. Do you feel like a fugitive? I mean, I'm listening to the story here, and it's almost like a 1950s version of the Underground Railroad.
Out here in western New York State, I feel like a fugitive from New Jersey. I just couldn't pass that one up. No, I've never felt, because it never happened to me, that I didn't know enough about what was going on to be concerned about it. However, I must tell you, just pull the computer out, just that when he left South Carolina, my brother was in Korea, and somehow or the other, my brother heard about this, and so he went to the Red Cross to inquire. And the Red Cross got the word that, no, your parents are safe, they're right at home in South Carolina, nothing has happened. And my cousin was in, female, was in the WAC, and she got the same kind of information that, nope, nothing has happened. All of these are erroneous. And another interesting aside is that, at the same time, they went through, when Mother and Daddy had left and left our possessions there in the house, they went through the house and searched. My brother was in the medic corps in the Army, and he had been a biology major in college, and he had bought a microscope from the doctor who was in the Army. And they actually had somebody come to Korea. Now, they didn't send a person there, but I guess they had the MPs or whoever go and interview this doctor to find out whether my brother stole the microscope.
Really?
Yes. Okay. All right. Now we want to find. Yes, you may go on. I'll try to keep looking at while I find this.
Well, and he ultimately ends up in Buffalo, and the church didn't strike me until just the other day. It's known as the Delaine Waring AME Church. So here you have a church named after your dad, black minister, and a white South Carolina judge, which in and of itself is a story. It's amazing.
My husband asked me, are you going to talk about that? And I said, no, so he said, you really should, but I'm not going to talk about it on the day. When Daddy was there and they had to have a name for the church, the people wanted to name it Delaine Church because Daddy founded the church. And Daddy said, no, it has to have Waring's name in it. And Waring has not, and he still hasn't gotten the right kind of acclaim for what he did, the stands that he took. So Daddy was adamant that it stayed there. And when Daddy left there, they tried to change the name of the church to something else. And I think the new pastor tried to change it. I think that Daddy made a stink about it, and some of the members did, and so it has remained as Delaine Waring.
We had a long conversation yesterday with the minister of the church.
Oh, really?
And they were hoping that their schedule would permit them to come down here.
That would be nice.
They're having a huge AME conference tomorrow, which conflicts with your presentation, and so they said, oh my God. So they may try to sneak down, and it just so happens that their quarterly or semi-annual or annual event
Annual conference
happens to hit exactly tomorrow night. So he wants everything. I mean, he wants to know from making sure that we get the books and everything that you do here, which has involved They want it for their archives, and they want to work with us, and that's
Oh,
it's been
very
wonderful.
nice.
It's a wonderful connection.
I discussed it with my brother before I left a long time ago, and we decided not to even tell them because of the distance and the fact that it was in the midweek. The last barrage of shots had resounded through the still of the night. They echoed from the grotesque shell of the burned-out church. They reverberated up and down the quiet streets lined with large warehouses and small houses. They shook the souls of those who were awake to hear them. The three people in the house next to the parsonage huddled together, two of them trying to comfort the third, but needing to be comforted themselves. The smaller woman wanted to go out to stand beside her courageous husband, but the other two restrained her. "You can't do anything. He said you must stay here." The sounds died down. Minutes ticked by. No sounds came from outside. The three people watched from the windows. No one would have been able to approach the preacher from this side without being seen. Forever, it seemed. They waited and watched. The night wore on. A car motor started and moved away. And once more there was the dead silence of the October night. Still, they waited and watched. "I believe that was Reb's car leaving. I'm going to take a look." The man picked up his gun. Stealthily, he crept through his back door and far enough into the yard to see that the Mercury was gone. He'd seen enough. Fading back into his home, he wondered what his pastor's fate would be. Hearing the words, "Reb's car's gone," Mattie's loneliness and sadness swelled beyond measure. For her, the darkness became deeper than pitch blackness. Within her brain, the tempest raged. Torrential rains, whipped and driven by the gale-force winds, beat at her sanity. Fear wrapped her in bitter cold. There seemed to be no refuge. Her husband was gone. Where, she did not know. To what fate, she dared not imagine. That stormy night was almost too rough for her. Her hands wrung in sorrow, and tears streamed down her face. Several times in the early morning she drifted off, exhausted, into a fitful nightmare-filled sleep, each time to be awakened by horrifying dreams. She dreamt of burning houses, burning crosses, burning churches, ghostly visions of white men in sheets, of white men in cars, of white men with guns, fearsome, unreal sounds of stones striking board, of glass shattering glass, of shots piercing the darkness, nightmares of cars driving in the night, terrible visions of half running, half falling through lonely, danger-fraught corridors, always calling, "J.A., J.A., where are you? J.A., please answer me." And after each episode, she awoke, bathed in a cold sweat, shivering in the morning of that October night, clutching for the well-worn quilt, reaching for her absent husband. And awake, she prayed unceasingly, her never-ending prayer repeated over and over, "Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, our shelter from the stormy blast and our eternal home. Take care of him. Please, God, take care of him." The other woman rested little better. Her concern for the missing pastor was less intense, less personal. Haunting her was another fear, that of her own family's future. She and her husband had jeopardized themselves by taking in the frightened woman. Suppose they come here. Oh, Lord, what are we going to do? When they find out, what will the night riders come for us too? And she too fell to praying. "Oh God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come. Be thou our guard while troubles last, and our eternal home." The man of the house did not sleep. Throughout the rest of the night, he stood vigil with his shotgun, peering out of the windows of his house, watching, seeing all that happened. But inside his little house, next door to the burnt-out church and the pastor's house, he also kept his faith, softly repeating still another verse of the comforting old hymn as he adjusted the weight of his gun. Under the shadow of thy throne, thy saints have dwelt secure. Sufficient is thine arm alone, and our defense is sure.
That's just poignant.
Like that.
Literally, it was a day or two before your mother did catch up with your dad? Is that
The next morning, the part before that, which is longer, describes his flight out and how he sped through the night and so on. And when he got to one person's house, that person smuggled him to another person's house, and somebody went out to move his car, and a policeman came and said, a black policeman came and said, "That's a wanted car, don't touch it. You better stay away from it." So anyway, the man went down and got Mother the next morning. When he got there, the house was surrounded by onlookers and policemen and so on. And I guess they weren't watching the neighbor's house, and he got Mother out and they left.
Last year, when there was so much commemoration of Brown versus Boyd, and of course a lot of attention to Linda Brown and Cheryl Brown, which was the two of them. And though they deflected it in the sense that, you know, we're just one of 300 people, still nevertheless, because of serendipity and the circumstances of the cases, wasn't even alphabetical. Brown just happened to be listed first, and therefore that name gets attached to this separate but equal, and then with all the open speak. Does that bother you?
Yes. Yes. You want me to say something further?
If you'd like.
It bothers me that the people in South Carolina suffered so very terribly. And everybody thinks it's one man out in Kansas. And it bothers me that kids in Virginia couldn't go to school for 5 years, and everybody thinks it was one man out in Kansas. And that one man out in Kansas apparently did one thing, which was to sign his name and then disappear from the scene. So yes, it bothers me in that sense. Somebody's name had to be there, and it's always one person that will get the credit, but it seems like everybody has forgotten, including the NAACP, and this is a really bothersome thing to me. I had a brief chat with Ted, what's his name? Alzheimer's.
Jack Greenberg.
No, I won't talk about him, but Ted, the president of the NAACP, of the legal fund. Anyway, he didn't even know about Briggs, that Briggs was a major thing there. And so this bothers me that the whole history of it is lost, and people think that it was Kansas that started everything and that the other places just came in as a sideline. So yes, that is quite bothersome to me.
Maybe one of the good things out of having this 50th has in fact been a little bit of attention, not a lot, but a little bit of attention. The fact that there's more than just one case. Because my sense is that going through school, that's all you heard was Brown, Topeka, Brown, Topeka,
Right.
Topeka. And at least some effort has been made to say that, well, it was 5. I don't think it, still, years from now, it'll probably still be back.
It will still be Brown because we still believe that George Washington said, "I will not tell a lie." And sure, one morning I woke up and I said, "Hey, I know who Daddy is now." And I you know, you can never really know somebody, but it was a revelation that he's somebody, although he's long since dead, he's somebody other than just Daddy. And that was a real revelation, yes.
To me, it's interesting. I've never seen him until last year, City 48 and Separate but Equal, where clearly the storyline, albeit Hollywood, was in fact your family.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 5 cases, that was the one that was the one that had the most poignant. And even with the documentary that came out last year, Peter Gilbert's one with Walt Gilbert's Speed, that was just the two, and again, the family was the ones that were highlighted. So maybe there's an effort 50 years later to...
But it's still Brown to Beaker.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think people even believe that that was Brown to Beaker. Mm-hmm.
Did your dad, do you recall him talking about Brown 1, Brown 2, and departure time, and did he ever reflect on this whole thing, the whole experience?
Yes, but not when I had ears and did not hear. Mm-hmm. My husband never lets me forget that your dad tried to tell you these things and you didn't listen. So he tried to, and I knew some of it, but I did not know the basis. So the last things that he was telling me was just, yeah, so. But the people down there were really the ones that suffered. It is just unbelievable. Mrs. Annie Gibson was one of the petitioners. She was a maid in a motel, and her husband rented his farm from some good Christian white folks. Well, when she signed the petition, she was fired immediately. And that was November, I guess, that they filed this. It was in November 10th, maybe. And as soon as it was known, she was fired. And on Christmas Eve, that's December 24th, Christmas Eve, her good Christian landlord evicted them. This is why I just cannot fathom a hatred that is, somebody says that they're a Christian, love your fellow man and all of this kind of stuff, and yet would do that kind of thing. It's just beyond me. It's not believable. It sounds like a story. Another man had his, farmers of course don't have a lot of extra money, and so they borrow money in the beginning of the year to buy their seeds and fertilizers and fertilizer. This man had gotten a loan in order to buy a horse and a wagon. And if you don't have a horse, in those days, everybody didn't have tractors. If he didn't have a horse, there was no way to run a farm. So his loan was foreclosed. So the horse would have been taken away from him. And fortunately, other people collected money, and we were able to pay his loan off. But that was another thing that happened. So there were a number of things like that. And of course, many teachers were fired, including my mother and aunts and Daddy. Daddy was the first one to lose his job. Things that you may or may not be interested in. One, you said that, you asked me, did I feel like a fugitive? And I said no, but I wanted to comment that some years ago when my older brother lived in New Jersey, he had a home. Well, my husband and I had a very beautiful home, and my brother, who's not married, bought a house which was just kind of ordinary looking from outside, but inside there was a huge mahogany paneled room, which we call the Great Room, and in the back was a Japanese garden and a swimming pool. So we were out by the swimming pool one day, and I looked at my brother and I said, when we were children, would you have ever figured that we'd be here? And he said, no, but if they'd given us the bus, we wouldn't have been here. So, all because of a bus that I'm here, because if it hadn't been for that, I am sure that I'd never have gone on to higher education and done the things I've done and so on. The other thing I wanted to tell you about was retaliation. And there was a young man whose name was Reverty Wells. Reverty was the valedictorian of the senior class of 1949 at Scotts Branch. And he was kind of a peripheral figure in all of this, except for the fact if he hadn't done what he did, it would not have been as easy to mobilize the people. And Reverty's was the valedictorian. He said he had made all, I just talked to him about 4 weeks ago, he had made all A's in school ever since he was in 4th or 5th grade when a teacher gave him an A++. And he said, when I got that, I decided I'd keep trying very hard. All of his grades were changed to D's and F's. And he discovered that he started off at Allen in South Carolina, and he wanted to transfer to Temple. And when they received those grades, they said, no way. His grade, he finally got his accurate transcript. I believe it was in 1999. That's 50 years later.
Who's the hero in this story?
Well, this is another thing that I wanted to say. You asked me whether I was angry or when I hear Brown. And the heroes are a lot of little people. One could say that the hero was Judge Waring. He was a hero. There were a lot of heroes. My father was a hero. But every one of those little people, and when I say little people, I mean people who had no power. My father had a college degree. He would have been able to get a job somewhere. He had a farm, he was an entrepreneur and so on. He always had something else. Susan Lawson was a sharecropper. She was a single mother. She had nothing to turn to. She was definitely, she was evicted. Lee Richardson was a sharecropper. So there were a lot of heroes and no one, and of course everybody will give Thurgood Marshall credit, and he deserves credit, but he could not have done what he wanted to do without the little people. And my biggest anger at this point in history is the Congressional Medal, a gold medal that was given back in September. That was in 2004 that it happened. And it was given to my father, which I guess he deserved it. And it was given to Levi Pearson, and I guess he deserved it because he was the first one to take a stand. And then it was given to Harry and Eliza Briggs. That just plain was not fair. That's all there is to it, because Harry Briggs was just like Oliver Brown. His was just the first name. And there were all these other people who were ignored. And Eliza Briggs was just his wife. Not that just his wife is any little thing, but I think that the gold medal should have been given to those people who made it possible, as opposed to any 4 individuals. I finished talking about that now.
If we talk about the justices? Did Earl Warren mean anything? Do you remember? I mean, I know that probably your dad may have talked about him, but...
Nothing to me personal other than, no, nothing. I was not very politically astute, still am not. So I'm actually the wrong person to ask about things like that.
Briggs versus Elliott, what is the legacy here? You've got 50 years of the decision.
Of waffling. Well, the legacy is that finally this country of ours faced up to the fact that it could not keep or allow states to continue having laws that allowed and even enforced segregation. That's the legacy, that because you will never get rid of discrimination and a sort of segregation. It just won't happen because the Catholics are busy fighting the Protestants and the Serbs are busy fighting the whoever's and so on. We're always going to have this kind of thing. But once we have a government that says it's okay to have this kind of segregation, that is just, and a government that says it's a democracy, that's going to go out and tell the rest of the world how to run their business. In any case, if it hadn't been for Brown, the Brown case, the legacy of Briggs and so on, South Africa would still have apartheid. You know, the whole world would be very different.
What's your mission?
My mission? To get this book written before I pass away from the scene, before I make the transition also, recognizing almost daily now my mortality.
Are you collaborating with your brothers, or just Ophelia?
I'm the writer. They are the ones who remember things, so thank goodness for unlimited telephone calling. So I'm on the phone almost every day, picking their brains and picking other people's brains.
Is there an archive someplace of your dad's stuff?
At the Caroliniana Library.
Why there?
Yes, that's University of South Carolina. He was from South Carolina. I just can't get that name out ever. I can spell it finally, but I can't get it out.
Excuse me, I was enough of it. What about movies? I mean, was some of that there? Was that movies of the church itself, or were they just what you saw on TV? Movie screen there?
No, that's just something that they did there. The church burned to the ground, and of course that was not the house because the whole scene was as fake as it could get, other than the fact that the house did burn down.
Well, the picture at the very end is the picture of the whole family.
That was where our house was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's at the Smithsonian. I don't know if you've seen the exhibit at the Smithsonian, but the Brown versus Board, there's a lot on your dad during that exhibit.
The Levine Museum of the New South had a 6-month exhibit on Briggs. They called it Courage, and it was mainly about Daddy. And they won the most prestigious award that museums give for 2004 for that exhibit. So they got several awards for it. It's really a fantastic exhibit, and it was amazing what they were able to do with so few artifacts that were left around, but they did wonders. The designer was the woman that did, I think she did David's room in the Holocaust Museum, which was also an award-winning exhibit. So, and then there was also an excellent play that was staged at the not Charleston Playhouse, but we'll call it Charleston Playhouse for lack of a better name, which was excellent, but without funding. it died. I don't think so. It was a 1-month thing, but it was very, very good.
You're terrific.
Is it still running?
Yeah.
Oh, then I won't say I know it.
You know, inevitably
I really don't know it.
Does it bother you to go to South Carolina now?
No, that's a very interesting question. When I left South Carolina, when Daddy left South Carolina, which was in '55, I did not go back there until I guess it was '63, and that was only for a very short visit. And until about 1995, I had only been back there 3 or 4 times. But no, it doesn't bother me to go back, but when I get down south, I'm always amazed when I'm talking to a white person and they say ma'am to me. I'm still in segregated South, and when I have to go to the restroom, I'm still thinking, I can't go, I've got to go home. And when I see a water fountain, I'm still thinking, where's the colored water fountain? And so I'm still mentally segregated, but my younger brother moved back down there in the early 60s. And I'm not afraid, I don't think, but I'm very conscious, very, very conscious when I go in a restaurant down there.
My wife and I lived in North Carolina for
Mm.
years, and we decided a big part of our decision was all the prejudice and everything. I don't care if it's the color of your skin or the religion that you practice, or if you're on the wrong side of the tracks, or if you're from the north instead of the south. And we moved back here because we just felt very happy.
When was that?
We were there from 82 to 85.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get caught up at all in the reunions? Did you go to any of the things in Washington, D.C. when they had the various families invited? Browns and I don't know, the Briggs family. I just read about that they would.
In September, there was when the gold medal was awarded, I went to that. And they also had, I guess it was May 17th, the Legal Defense Fund had something. I was there, yes. But in general, I try to avoid people.
Oh, we're honored you didn't avoid us. And we appreciate the fact that Laura was our entree to you. So we dropped every name we possibly could.
No, I'm a very private person. I tend not to.
And yet when this book comes out, you won't be.
It probably will never sell because I will not go out there selling it. I'll read that one little excerpt and let people play that on the radio or something. That's it. Yeah. That's the high point of the book.
I don't think so. Laura, what else can she tell us about you?
Oh, God. Don't give us
So you've known Laura for over 40 years.
Gosh.
And we haven't changed it.
Yes.
And you've been to Chautauqua before, right?
Yes. Yes, Laura was perhaps the best housemate one could have. And she even arranged with our cook to have a wedding cake. A wedding cake made.
Well, let's hear it.
When I left going to the church, Kwasi, the cook, was still making the wedding cake, which the bottom tier was made in the frying pan, and the middle tier was made in the cake pan, and the top tier was made in the coffee tin boiled on top of the stove. And when Laura left, he was trying to figure out how to get some icing on it.
The icing was supposed to stiffen, and he knew it was right when he dropped it in cold water, but it was so humid.
It would never stiffen. And when I got back and when I finally saw the cake, it's something that one has to see. There was the top layer with the icing and the middle layer with the icing, and then there was the bottom layer. No icing. With out of two parts, where he'd cooked in the frying pan twice and then fit the two pieces together. I have a very memorable wedding picture.
Flip back just a second.
Yes.
Okay. About your mother. Clearly, she was a strong part of your dad's otherwise public life. Did she talk to you about it? Mother, daughters?
No. Some people have ears and will not hear. That was me, I guess. When I finally got to the point that I wanted to know, my visits were not long enough to get all of the information. So the main thing I would talk with my mother about in the latter days was her life as a child and growing up. And she'd once in a while say something about, but she had forgotten some things, and I believe some things she did not want to remember. However, I've talked with a number of women recently, and a number of people recently, and particularly the women say that your mother was such a wonderful person. She taught me so much, and she would have us come to her house, and we would stay there while to wait until our parents could come in their horse and buggy or their cars or whatever to take us home from school. And she would do homework with us, and she would give money when necessary, and so on. And they always think of my mother as a beautiful person. And I'm just always amazed at the admiration that people give to. She was just mother to me. Even when she was 90 years old, people would come for hundreds of miles just to see Mother, just to say, hello, Mrs. Delaine, how are you? And I was always amazed, and even for Daddy also, that when he was dying, a woman left New York and went to Charlotte, a nurse, to take care of my father. And I thought to myself, what kind of person is this that leaves her job to go and take care of a man? But he was somebody that helped people. He was there, he gave advice to people, he did anything he could to lead people, to show them the way to live. Recently I've talked with an old man who I've been trying to pump some information out of him about old times. And ultimately he stops talking about all of that. And he says, you know, your father made me the man I am. If it hadn't been for your father, I would have just been a complete loser. And they both seem to have evoked this kind of admiration and love and respect from people, and that I guess they must have just given of themselves.
Totally unrelated question. Your dad clearly was the individual who grabbed the signatures for the petition which led to Briggs versus Elliott. Well, you weren't in that school district, were you? I mean, you did not physically live there, did you?
Mm-hmm.
You did? Were you on that petition?
Mm-mm.
Reason?
That's what I used to wonder. And I guess it's the same reason, part of the reason is that a general doesn't go out on the battlefield. And I suppose that was part of it. Originally, now, he was not a petitioner because, for example, for the original bus, we lived, here's the school is here and we lived here. We didn't even live 50 feet from the school, so we had no need for a bus. He was a teacher, and if he had signed, he certainly would have lost his job. From the beginning, apparently, he knew that he was going to lose his job ultimately anyway, but kind of figured that he would be in a better position to lead as long as he had not signed something. And apparently that did work, because he was in the county superintendent of schools, worked with him and for quite a while until Daddy finally presented a petition to them that I guess the powers that be said, this will not happen anymore, Delaine's got to go. So I think that this was a tactical move that perhaps his NAACP and other advisors had told him to do. He had one man, a Reverend Adams from Columbia, that he was very, very close with, and visited probably once every 2 weeks or so. And when Daddy was sued, even before that, Daddy transferred almost all of his property into this man's name. So that, you know, that's a lot of trust, that you transfer your property in somebody's name. And I think that he served as a major advisor to Daddy. I know he did. I didn't just think that.
That's interesting. I never know. Everybody has everybody needs a confidant. Somebody, when the lights are off, and you can go and just kind of emote.
Well, I think Mother was that person for Daddy, but I think that sometimes she was a little more fearful, where Daddy was more rash. She was hesitant, and I can hear him say, "Oh, Maddie, you worry too much." But Reverend Adams, I think that he probably gave Daddy a lot of advice, and indirectly or directly, Hinton probably did also. And Bo Ware, who was the South Carolina lawyer for the NAACP.
Did your dad have much of correspondence directly with Marshall? Just through Bo Ware?
And I don't know how many times he met with Marshall. I know of one time, but I don't know about that. But Bo Ware was the intermediary there.
Wow. It's been phenomenal. Thank you for your time.
Okay, you're welcome.